Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Magic Arena Run, and today we're going to be doing a top 10 video. It's actually very interesting. It's basically thinking about all the different groups of people in the multiverse of Magic, and we actually find a lot of interesting stories stem from them being related. Well, there are some interesting stories, not necessarily pertaining to them being related, but family is a very powerful driving force, especially in storytelling. In fact, if you remember, Angrat has having a family is pretty much a driving force for him in trying to get off that godforsaken plane of Ixalan. Though why that would make him want to go back and potentially get stranded again in Ravnica remains to be seen. But it was still an interesting driving force. The image of a Minotaur going home to the young Minotaur kids. Also, Tamio has a family as well. Neither of them will be mentioned here because, unfortunately, it's only mentioned story. The other family members don't exactly have cards. So there we go. Of the ones that do have cards, they're not exactly quite there. So one, because only one card is only one of the two cards is standard legal. I chose the guild kit version for Tesa because the original version is kind of weird. There's some sort of photo bomber on the background. And you notice that all the other cards come from a commander deck, and they never exactly became relevant to the story. Like Edgar became the driving force of turning Sorin into a planeswalker, but that's pretty much more of history rather than actual story. And we never see any or hear anything from Granddaddy Markov ever again. Giselle Goldmane was relevant to Ajani's Planeswalker Spark story, tragic death, being ambushed and whatnot. But he got over it relatively quickly by the time you see him again. And the Karlov story is a bit more interesting, although the way they treat each other, it seems to be like family in name only, and one probably would want to spit at the other for the way they treat each other. But that's how things go. That's why they didn't exactly quite make it. Now here's a one carder. Now technically it's two cards only because Annex got reprinted later. But we have the story of the King and Queen of Akros, Annex and Samid. Both of them loving each other. They're technically just the facsimile of King Leonidas and Queen Gorgo of Spart. Okay, I really have to double check my history just to be sure, but that's pretty much a storyline. Although instead of facing a horde of Persians, the story goes that they had to face a horde of Minotaurs, all under the influence of a certain god that looks like a Minotaur. Now, Annex was out in the field. Samid did not just stand back and protect the city. She was also very active, being a disciple of Keranos. She offered herself as a sacrifice so that to deal with the otherworldly influence, and the king almost died or almost died in the story. But otherwise, their sacrifice pretty much kept Akros alive. So, in a manner of speaking, the city of Akros was much a family to them as each other. Also, an interesting tidbit: Annex was reborn as a demigod in the Terras Beyond Death storyline, and as efficient though somewhat mindless as he was, he does keep mentioning Samid. In fact, that's the only word he ever says. The afterlife sucks in Greece, or Teros in this case. But there you go, number 10, the King and Queen of Akros, husband and wife in life and death. Number 9, we have our first pair of siblings on the list. We have the Sasani family. Both of them hail from Innistrad, kicked out for their shenanigans. The way they treat each other is basically like when you have siblings throwing tantrums at each other, throwing their best toys against each other. Very, very competitive. Their story is actually very fun if you look at it on the official site. It kind of reads like it reads like really mean tweets towards each other, or like really mean comments. But it's quite funny at the same time. That said, they're not just always slinging undead at each other like bored youth. They actually can get together. In fact, there's one time they decided to invade Traven and they decided to take out. Wait a minute. What's this? There's another family member? Oh yeah. It turns out that the one who kicked them out was Micaeus himself. Now he's technically a distant cousin, but they decided that and in fact they were working together. Air quotes, working together. They kind of found their different ways, but they did have a plan. They were going to kill their cousin, and they succeeded. And Liliana kind of brought him back to the family. Now, when it came to the Eldritch Moon storyline, they were pretty much how do you say? They were pretty much the temp agency for Nahiri, supplying the workforce Nahiri needed to enact her plan. And we see them together in this tidbit where when they're facing off against all these Eldrazi horrors and whatnot, that they can still work together and throw snide comments at each other. For those who actually have siblings, this probably sounds more relatable than most. But anyway, there you go. Number 9, the Sasani family. Very interesting, though. Their storyline feels more like a side story, but it's a very, very good side story. And it's sad to say that both of their main cards were in just Commander. Ghoul Caller Gisa did get a reprint in Jumpstart, but otherwise there's only one legit card. It's just the two of them together here, but it's still a good one. Number 8. This one's a family that was the main driver of the story. It's the Kamigawa storyline. In particular, the prologue part of this would be Takeshi Konda, Lord of Eiganjo, wants to make his realm a much better place. You know the saying that a villain always sees themselves as the hero of their own story. So what does he do to ensure the prosperity and the peace of his world? He kidnaps a kami and takes it hostage. And it has to coincide with the birth of his daughter because both of them have to be tied together, so to speak. And that's pretty much how we start the storyline of Kamigawa. The mortal realm and the spiritual realm are at war with each other. Michiko Konda grows up 20 or so years later, and she kind of tries to figure out why the heck was she born in a world of war. She actually kind of figures out that the war pretty much started soon after her birth, and she wants to also wonder why her father was so distant. Isamaru Hound of Konda also makes an appearance here because he's pretty the loyal hound kind of gets ignored the same way Michiko gets ignored by her father Takeshi. But they both move around. In fact, Michiko is the prime mover of the story, trying to figure out what's happening, and eventually comes to the point where she frees her quote unquote spiritual sister by another mother, and together they deal with their respective parents. Well, Michiko actually has to kill her father to bring peace to the mortal realm, and with that, both of them eventually become the guardians of the mortal and spiritual realms. And they still continue the job to all the way when the storyline reaches the time spirals block. And did I mention that this storyline was supposedly like 300 years in the before Magic's past, so to speak? But anyway, there we go. Number 8, pretty much the main family of Kamigawa, the Konda family. Number 7, the Vest family. Technically, it's just brother and sister Liliana and Josue Vest. Now, Liliana's quest to save her brother was pretty much the prime mover of her story. And when it turns out that the remedy that she gave was actually what turned her brother into a hulking undead monstrosity, it pretty much also turned on her spark. It also became the mover of her guilt. it's not exactly the prime mover of her story. Her story was about her making a bad decision or very high risk, high reward decision of tying herself uh, to a contract with four different demons, and now she tries to find a way to take out all four demons. And eventually, her contract broker, Nicol Bolas, but on her quest to deal with the last demon, her her guilt comes back to her in the form of Josue now being in control of their former demons. And although she technically could have ignored it, after all, her quest was for Bells Unlock, and if she took out Bells Unlock, it probably would have taken out Josue, or Josue might have been independent. But the guilt of her having created her brother into the monster that this was, she had to come back and she had to put an end to it. It's pretty much the end of the Vest family at this point. Nothing else survived. There is probably no chance of her ever coming back to redeem herself here. Though she is technically in the road to redemption now, story-wise. But there you go. Number 7, the Vest family. Pretty much here because it's a very interesting introspective on how guilt can move someone towards action. Like how bad decisions in the past can move a person. Now, one could continue to wallow in grief, or one could stand up to right the wrongs when the chance is given. But it's not the main part of her story. So that's why she's only down here in number 7. Number 6, we have Ugin and Nicol Bolas. Born from the same egg, the twin elder dragons, they make a very important appearance, especially in the Fate Reforged storyline. But also their relationship continues all the way up to War of the Spark, where it comes to a close. I only put them at number 6 because Ugin was kind of created well afterwards. In fact, Ugin was created from a future shifted card, which was just Ghostfire, basically a colorless burn spell. Nicol Bolas pretty much had his own main storyline. Ugin kind of felt like he was shoveled into the story, but they actually do have a very good 5 or 6 parter story in the main site, especially when it was the Nicol Bolas set. I think that was M19, and pretty much it showed how Nicol Bolas ended up becoming the top dog of the Elder Dragons. You have to remember that I'm only showing the Nicol Bolas Planeswalker appearance here, but once upon a time he was just a legendary creature. So there we go, number 6, Ugin and Nicol Bolas. Their story has pretty much come to a close at this point. That's why this is already here. Speaking of sibling rivalry, we have number 5, Urza and Mishra. Now, this one, if we just take story into account and not the cards, this one probably would be really high, because even though if we take the whole history of Dominaria from all the way up to, let's say, let's ignore Arabian Nights, Antiquities, and limited early releases, all the way up to Invasion Block. Mishra dies kind of well in the 1/4 of in the first 1/4 of the printing of cards. He dies right before Ice Age. In fact, Urza killing Mishra causes the Ice Age. But all of Urza's decision making is pretty much if it was not based on him having to deal with what his brother was doing, it was him having to deal with the guilt of what he did to Mishra. And in fact, a lot of it changes and shapes most of his actions in the rest of the story. Now, it's a very, very long story to narrate, but one can say that everything that Urza does after that point could be, if it's not for his guilt towards what he did to his brother, it was his anger towards what the Phyrexians did to his brother. Now, the reason they're both kind of low is because it took a long time for them to get respective cards. Mishra actually got his first in Mishra Artificer Prodigy in Time Spiral. He could use a much better card, but it's okay. It's not bad. Urza finally got his own card. We're not including the unstable version where it's just the head as a planeswalker. We have him as the Lord High Artificer in Modern Horizons. But there we go. Number 5, Urza and Mishra. Pretty much the prime movers of the entire Dominaria storyline with some key exceptions. Number 4, we have Teferi. Speaking of an old Dominaria stalwart, though this one pretty much focuses on Teferi's story after Time Spiral. So all the way before, he was just this powerful troublemaker, causes mischief, but the consequences of his actions eventually leaves him as a old and broken man. He made the fateful decision to phase out his homeland, could not return it back to its proper place when trying to mend the multiverse again. And after all that, he seemingly lost his spark and was now treated as the villain. Like he's the jerk that phased out an entire nation. However, he saw his redemption in his wife, traveling caravaneer Subira. They have a daughter together, Nyambi. Although the mother seems to be absent because she's always away at work, but that's kind of her nature. Other than that, the father and daughter have a very respectful relationship of each other. In fact, she cares for him enough that she wants him to redeem himself. And that's why Teferi is now back in the storyline. We see it's not just him being the hero of Dominaria. He shows up again in War of the Spark. Though one can say that he still has the charm of old, being powerful but very annoying to deal with. But there we go. Number 4, we have the Teferi family. Number 3, we have the very original family. In fact, if you're an old-time player, you've heard of the Senjir family. This is probably the only bright spot in what is otherwise a very, very poorly designed set, or very poor set in general. Ironically, none of these guys are actually related. We'll start with Grandmother Senjir. She was a planeswalker. She ends up in the plane of Ulgotra. She uses it as her home, starting up death magic and whatnot. She meets a human baron. I haven't read that far into his name. Actually, we can find all the details of the storyline in the MTG wiki, especially for the older storylines like this. And she makes him into a vampire, and one good deed follows another. Baron Senjir defeats an invading dwarven army, takes their princess as collateral, and turns her into a vampire, Irini Senjir. And every good family has to have a respectable butler, so we have the Veldraine of Senjir. As far as their family influence is concerned, it seems to be going very successfully. When they checked up in the storyline on the Time Spiral story, it seems like Ulgotra is now overrun with the darkness. So it looks like the Senjir family won after all, although it took a long time to do so. So number 3, we have the Senjir family, pretty much rated up here based on nostalgia. Could probably swap places with, say, the Urza family, or maybe Teferi's own storyline, or even the Vest storyline, I guess. Number 2, we have the most recent family showcase, the Kendricks family. I'm putting this one relatively high because this is a full family: father, mother, and twin siblings. Although the actual storyline, there's a bit of a spoiler as to their entire family, but the entire story of all 4 of them is pretty much the driving force. When daddy goes missing, the kids have to go look for him. Both father and mother came together because they were adventurous at their prime in their own time. They eventually fell in love with each other, and they became and this is the kingdom that they wrought I will tell you one thing though, that the events of Battle Bond are actually set after the events of Eldraine, so a bit wonky in terms of timeline placing. But otherwise we do have the Kendricks family. I put this up here because of one being very recent, two, the search for a father was the ultimate driving force of their story. Probably could be a little bit lower because their story is already done at this point. But otherwise, having all four family members represented. I'm showing the battle bond cards for Will and Kenrit, but both of them get their own card in the Royal Science. So the entire family is there in Eldraine. The only other family that could say that would be the Senjer family and the Konda family. So there we go. Number 2, Kenrit family. I bet you can guess what number 1 is right now. Number 1, we have the Nalar family. Not exact. Although Chandra's story is kind of found its closure at this point, we have the story of father, mother, and daughter, and them coming to terms with with their daughter's burgeoning abilities. The fact that Chandra had to be separated from her parents, it's what caused her spark to ignite. This happened at a very young age. She kind of avoided going to Kaladesh altogether because of this trauma. But part of the storyline is her coming back, her realizing that her mother is Chandra realizing her mother is still alive. Well, she already knows that her father died. She saw that with her own eyes, but realizing that her father has a legacy driving the force of revolution. But it wasn't really about the revolution. Even though what followed Kaladesh was a revolt, that was not the main mover of the story. The main mover of Chandra's story was reuniting with her mother, and that was not the end of it. Ada revolt was not the end of of their relationship. After War of the Spark, there was a set of comics around Chandra. She again has to go back to Kaladesh, this time to after she made peace with herself. She has to go to her mom. She has to save her mom because of Tybalt. Why? But this was pretty much the number 1 moving family story. If one could, between the Nalar family story and the Vest family story, one could say that the Nalar family was more heartbreaking. Though actually, now that I think of it now, I put this up really highly because of how much I like the story, but objectively this may not necessarily be the case. So that's pretty much all of the families I put in rankings. I will agree that for some of you guys, you might rank these differently. So actually, let me know in the comments how would you rank these families, or is there any family in the storyline that I've missed? Basically, only requirements is 2 people that are related. I did not include and related as in officially related. Like Ral Zarek and Tomik, they're seeing each other, but they don't exactly have they're not exactly declaring their relationship together. They haven't made it. It may be official in their eyes, but it's not. But they're not exactly living together as a family unit. They're still kind of visiting each other. Well, because of guild business, you know the politics behind that. For the same reason, Ixadore and Akroma, I did not put them in the family list because both of them were lovers, and it never got a chance to become a family. Ixadore's lover died. He did get to rebuild her as Akroma, but that's another story. And I did not include a lot of the descendants, sort of. So the Umezawa family tree I did not include because that's a very long line between events. Pretty much everyone's like a descendant of someone else. For the same reason, a lot of characters did from the Weatherlight saga and their descendants don't make the storyline for this list for that same reason as well. But let me know if you guys think differently. Who do you guys think makes for like the best family in the storyline? Until then, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you guys again next time. Take care, God bless, stay safe wherever you are. Have a great week, everyone.